Hi, everyone. My name is Anshu Aurora. I'm the Marketing and Student Acquisition Director here at RMIT Online. And very lucky to be having Daniel and Regina join us today for our panel. Daniel is the MD and co-founder of one of Australia's most successful startups, Thankyou. He co-founded Thankyou at the age of 19, and 12 years later, Thankyou's products are stocked across major retailers in Australia. He's also an author of best-selling book Chapter 1, and is known for his ability to tell stories to engage and motivate audiences and help them realise that they too can make their ideas a reality. We've also got Regina, who is the lead creative tinker at Thinkerbell. She's been helping build brands for the past 12 years and has worked across agencies in Melbourne and in London across a diverse range of clients from different sectors. And most recently, Regina was also named a finalist in the B&T Women in Media Awards. So welcome to you both. But before we get started with all the questions, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boorong language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. I respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past and present. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. So thank you so much again. Welcome, Regina and Daniel. How are you both?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Lovely. Well, look, I might kick off with a bit of a fun question. Well, hopefully international borders are opening up soon and we're all probably dreaming of an overseas holiday. Where's the first place on your list?
Oh, I want to go to New Zealand and visit some family and friends, I think. I've got friends who've had babies like 2 years ago who I haven't seen yet, and my sister and that type of thing. So I'll be off to New Zealand.
As soon as we get open. How about you, Daniel?
Well, I love that. I think practically we'll be off to New Zealand too. We love it there. We lived there for 1.5 years a while ago, although we did make this commitment when Justine and I got married. We're like, cool. So for our 10 years, we'll go to the Maldives. It was just like one of those things. And then we had our 10 years in lockdown in Melbourne. So I'm not sure what year we'll get there, but at some point we need to get there. But yeah, New Zealand's probably next, I reckon.
Fantastic. Oh, Maldives sounds amazing though, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, I might kick off with you first, Daniel. I mean, Thankyou is a social enterprise that has raised over $17 million, and 100% of your profits go towards ending extreme poverty throughout a number of different initiatives. Why has it been so important for the company to remain so transparent about these initiatives?
I mean, I think in our minds, we're building, you could call it a brand, you could associate it as a product, but in our mind, it's a movement. It's a new way of, living and consuming that has huge benefit to the world we live in. And so we just naturally want to tell that story. Do we think that everyone knows the story? No. In fact, the researchers know everyone doesn't know the detail, but it doesn't stop us sharing the stories because, they matter to us. The impact is incredible. And those who follow along really loyally seem to really appreciate the depth we go to, even though at times I feel like maybe we overshare, but it works for Thankyou.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, Regina, you've worked across a number of different iconic Australian brands throughout your career. I think Vegemite, Beko, Chico Roll are some of them. How do you think with the pandemic, what has that emphasised the importance of brand transparency?
I think COVID-19 has impacted our lives in so many ways. And lately, I think during this pandemic, Australian traditional institutions have sort of been letting us down a bit with poor vaccination rollouts and that type of thing. And so people have just resorted a lot to the brands that they know, and they're especially Australian made brands which signal safety. And they're also expecting more from the brands that they trust. So they want them to sort of empathize with consumers, and we want to know how brands are taking care of their communities and their employees and that type of thing. And an example of this, I think, is Qantas's most recent TV ad. So it tapped into an insight around how many people have missed seeing loved ones by not being able to travel and make these memories. And then they actually taking action and offering incentives for vaccination and that type of thing. So I think brands that show that they're doing something when it seems like maybe governments aren't doing much is become really important to us.
Yeah. And I think, you know, what we see is like, you know, I think that 85% of people have said that they're likely to stick to a brand during a brand crisis if that brand has the history of being transparent as well. So that continuous story, it's not just something that you can switch on, it's that historical piece that you want to bring, that brand transparency as you evolve the brand. I mean, why are we thinking that customers demanding that transparency even more so today than previously? Might start with you, Daniel.
Okay. Look, I there's a few ways this could go, but I think that because you know, great brands and leaders and organizations have led with transparency, and it's a good thing. Others have expected the rest of the market to catch up, and there are great rewards for it. You know, people do stick, and we've had our challenges at Thankyou now, crisis moments, but people have stuck with us. You know, because, you know, maybe not everyone. You know, I'm sure we lose people many days, but those many have stuck with us through tough times because we've had, hopefully, what we believe is a consistent approach over 12 years now of just sharing the ins and outs of the tough moments. But I think, yeah, I think others we look up to have done this, and that's created a market expectation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what, I mean, what does that mean then for marketing teams in this new era of customer expectations from your point of view, Regina?
I'm not really think necessarily transparency is what makes consumers stick with a brand. I think it could be more around the size of the business and how hard it is to switch. So an example of this could be Apple, which are not particularly transparent, and they do things like intentionally slow people's phones down and have bugs in their security and privacy features a lot. And yet research that I was looking into showed that consumers still trust Apple and they still stick with them, I think. And one of the reasons they do this is because the experience itself they trust in, they know what they're getting when they purchase it. It's always the same sort of user experience. And it's very hard to switch from Apple once you've got all your stuff sorted. So yeah, it's maybe not necessarily transparency, but yeah, the size and how hard it is to switch, which keeps people around.
Yeah, so it's a combination of kind of that brand story, that customer experience, and that product combined that you think are what causes that kind of advocacy in that brand.
I think so, yeah.
Just out of interest, do you reckon, Regina, that it could be, there could almost be two fronts here, like existing brands that are established maybe have a different measure to, I wonder if some of the startups and the newer brands, there is this expectation of, but how does everything work? And have you thought through everything before we buy in? I don't know, do you see that at play?
I think, yeah, the bigger the brand, the more likely people are to stick with it, I think. If you're a smaller brand, maybe you do need to have more of those answers and be more transparent in some ways compared to the bigger brands.
Yeah. We might actually put up we've got a poll that we've got, which will go up, which is, are we willing to pay more if we're assured transparency from a brand? So if everyone could put in their answer, that would be awesome. And we'll share the results as they come through. It's a really interesting point, Daniel. I just might go back to what you were talking about before around established brands versus newer brands that are coming into the market. And I guess the expectation from consumers that haven't got that kind of relationship with these new brands and not demanding, but almost expecting a level of transparency for them. I mean, especially with social media coming on board and kind of playing a key role in terms of user choice at the moment. I mean, what are some of the the challenges or the advice that you might have for new brands that are trying to build that brand trust in this new era?
Yeah, and look, I think it's interesting because as we talk about this, I'm reflecting on the Thankyou journey. Ours is a little bit nuanced by, we are making some pretty bold claims. And this is a social enterprise. And so naturally, there's a level of skepticism. Okay, you're saying you want to make a difference and this is all about changing the world. Well, you know, particularly in Australia, I would say there is a prove it and really prove it and have you thought through everything approach. Whereas if we were, say, you know, this may not be the best example, Regina, you may have a better one, but we're launching a good toothbrush and it's a good one. Like that has a different level of expectation versus this, what we're representing is at times complex issues and funding and sort of business, but really in the charity space, which enters a lot of trust issues also. And so I think, look, my answers are naturally going to be filtered through that too, I'd say.
How about you, Regina?
I think brand transparency is also a good marketing technique for brands. So it almost in a way, in regards to the poll that we just did, allows them to charge more for their product. For example, Professor Michael Norton did some research and he tested 2 different ways. So say you have a airline booking website and you press the search button and one just shows you a progress bar and then pops up the results. And in another version, when you clicked search, it actually went through and showed you all the different websites and airlines it was looking at and then showed you the results. And it showed that people were more likely to purchase the flights when they could see all the different places that the algorithm had searched through, because they thought that it had worked harder for them to find the result. In which case they sort of trusted it more, and then the conversion rate was higher. So being transparent is also a good marketing technique in that way. The same, I guess, you can see in sort of fashion examples where you put workshops in the fashion retail stores. So you can see, from start to finish, pattern development and sampling and cutting and sewing and hand stitching. And then when people see that, they can see how much work goes into it. So the transparency in the production leads them to be willing to pay more for that item.
Yeah, almost lifting that curtain and really providing an insight into how that business operates.
Yeah.
What brands do you think are currently doing that well? Are there any standouts from your perspective?
I think Domino's did that really well with their Domino's pizza tracker. So you could track your pizza. So from when you ordered it to when it was made, to when it was put in the oven, to when it was put in the box, to when it was coming to you. And because you could see it, all the work that went into your pizza, you were kind of willing to wait a bit longer for it, as well as maybe pay a bit more for it because of, I guess, the transparency and how it was put together.
How about you, Daniel? Any brands that you think that are doing this well?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good example you just gave, Dan. I think the latest launch from Off-White collaboration with Nike was interesting. And I haven't gone super deep on every element of the launch, but certainly just when you hit this landing page, and it's almost like you got the behind the scenes look at the campaign as if you were the team running it. And so you're clicking through these files and you're opening up, details about the materials, and then you're opening up ads. And it was a really interesting take. Transparency, I haven't bought anything, but I just loved it. And I was like, there was a time where this was like, that's not a launch and this is theirs. I think it's kind of got this human realness to it and the process, and that's interesting to people. And Domino's is another example. These little facts matter, and they hold people's attention and maybe gain loyalty and more price potentially.
We do a similar thing at Thinkerbell, I guess, kind of the lifting of the curtain. We have tissue sessions with clients. So when we're coming up with ideas, we get them in, and it's kind of like a think tank, and you go through them together and see which bits we like, which bits we don't like. So it's kind of a work in progress, and then the clients have more ownership of the ideas, and it makes it easier to sell in one at the end and that type of thing. So I think transparency and taking people on the journey is really helpful.
And it's so interesting that you talk about kind of like lifting the curtains. I guess there is that, and where, at what point is that balance between providing transparency to your consumers, but also holding that competitive advantage around, your IP and how you deliver a service or a product. What are some of the guide rails that you think are important for brands to understand around finding that balance for them?
Yeah, look, just to jump in, I think that transparency and trust, they get thrown together a lot, but they kind of at times are a little bit at war with each other, because if you trust a brand, you know, demanding full transparency on everything. I want everything. Well, I mean, you're not approaching that. That's not a trust relationship with that brand. You know, and so there's a level of trust. Sorry, there's a level of transparency needed, but there is a line. I definitely think there's a line, and you know, you cross that line too far, and you enter a whole bunch of other challenges that don't help you win trust, but they may backpedal. You may give up IP, or you may let people in too far. Or you know, for many organizations, they know exactly what this is. And sometimes today's reality is either too complex to fully understand or too scary. Like it is, particularly during COVID. Business is changing rapidly. I think if everyone had full transparency of all things, it would be even more uncertainty. And so brands have to find that line between providing an element of certainty. Yeah.
I don't think transparency fits with, I guess, all brands in a way. So I guess whatever it needs to fit into as a brand, you need to have a clear positioning statement and brand idea. So, and then whatever that is, what you do with transparency should fall out of that. So I guess people want brands to be consistent, and they want them to show up consistently across all touch points. So whether it's partnerships or design cues or everything, they want to sort of know what they're getting. So I'm trying to think of an example. Coles has a good one. So their brand positioning is value the Australian way. So that's kind of inbuilt into all of their communications, their hiring policies, their external communications. Everything they do is value the Australian way. And so they're quite, I guess, transparent about their goals in sustainability and innovation, and how much Australian produce they use and that type of thing.
Yeah. There's a great question actually from the audience around, you know, that with COVID, some organisations have been impacted in terms of how they provide the same brand experience in this new kind of COVID world, and that kind of can impact their customers and their expectations, opening up, you know, a lot of different things that they have to navigate through. With that shift, I mean, how do you manage this? How do you manage businesses that are also transitioning, but also wanting to provide a consistent brand experience with the face of COVID?
I think it's.
I should actually point to. I will say your name, Regina. Sorry.
I think it's tricky.
Still trying to navigate it.
I think it can be tricky for some brands who have relied on sort of a physical appearance and showing up in a physical space to move to purely online and to get the same experience there. So I think everyone's still kind of navigating how best to do that. And I guess as more and more of our everyday lives are moving online, like we exercise online now, and we shop online, and we learn online, and we work online, it's a big change. I don't think there's two definite answers on how you can best get the same customer experience online.
Yeah. And Daniel, I think, I mean, with Thankyou, you guys, it's more less the experience, more the actual product. I mean, I think you started off with the Thankyou waters and decided to, you know, change and go into different product directions. Does that present challenges from you in terms of, you know, the brand and the perception of that brand?
Yeah, I mean, the decision to leave water, which was our Genesis kind of product, to us was a long journey, and it should happen quicker. But we initially thought, oh, cool, there'll be a solution that is sustainable, that ticks all the boxes. And then the further we went down that rabbit warren, the more we discovered there are heaps of green ticks and heaps of, like, most people would think it's better, but actually it's not. And so the only solution became exit in our view. And that was interesting because we had retail partnerships, millions of dollars of revenue. But we made a call because I think for us, it's about a long game. And the long game for us, we didn't see this playing a role, particularly as we take Thankyou around the world. And so when we launched in New Zealand, we didn't take the water. We led with our personal care. And that was yeah, it was an interesting move, but it worked for us. And so then we pulled it off shelf here. But it is interesting because people still come up, they're like, oh, how's Thankyou Water going? And
Yeah.
here's Daniel from Thankyou Water. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
So like, these things stick a lot longer. I mean, we even have people, how's your Thankyou Water hand wash going? And Justine and I, that's like our least, but ideas stick in people's minds and sometimes they're hard to change. But I think, look, water for us happened right at the beginning. Well, kind of just before the pandemic, we'd already made that call. But I think a really interesting example of experience for us was every product of ours has an individual tracker code. You type it into the website, speaking of transparency, we'll show you the exact project, GPS coordinates of like where your product is assigned to fund. But during the pandemic, we had to pull out of that whole system because our partners didn't need tied money to specific projects. They're all in kind of free fall. They need the freedom to be able to move money, to be able to do different projects, problem solve their end. So what they needed was unrestricted funding. We were providing restricted funding, and we made a kind of like a moral decision, like we are all for impact. This is going to hurt at it. I mean, the product, literally, if you buy one right now, it says TUI not available. So where the codes were, it says it's not available. That is potentially an experience, trust, transparency challenge, but ultimately we think we made the right call for impact. And I think lots of brands have been faced with that during this time.
And so how do you kind of make your consumers aware of those changes that you go through, and obviously, give that transparency to them when you've got a code that potentially isn't working the way in which your consumer might expect it to?
Yeah, I mean, look, we communicate. That doesn't mean everyone hears. We certainly don't have the budgets necessarily to help everyone hear that message, but we communicate it, and it may start with quite a jarring experience, like, what do you mean it's not available? But on our website, and we've released some kind of deep letter thinking as to why it's really important, the thinking behind it. And every time we make a move that's, in this case, a bit rushed, or in other cases dramatic like the water, we try and lay out our thinking. They often make for quite long letters, and we know not everyone's going to read that, but those that do, it seems to really stick. And that has helped us because there's only so many people I can tell the why behind what we did, but if others learn it, they can tell it too. And that's been a little bit of how we've grown as a brand. Yeah.
I actually have another poll for the audience around, do we think brand transparency is just a trend? And you can explain your answers in the chat as well. But for Daniel and Regina, I think, we have seen brand transparency listed as one of the top marketing trends for 2021. What do you guys think? Do we think it is just a trend, or is this going to be an expectation from consumers moving forward? Regina, I might start with you.
I don't think brand transparency is a trend. I think it's probably here to stay, but how, I guess, that is it, like what version of that sort of it transforms, and I'm not really sure. So brand transparency started off as being transparent with where brands put their money and companies did with their money, and then it shifted into sustainability and that type of thing, and then data transparency, and now it's kind of moving into inclusivity and that type of thing. So it'll be interesting to see, like, I guess, where consumers are maybe demanding transparency in which areas in the future. But I think it's definitely here to stay.
Danny, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. I think it's here to stay. I think it is a very complicated thing to navigate, though, and that's because we live in a world where everyone now has access to data, right? And so, I mean, I almost don't want to go there with COVID and vaccines and that whole topic, but like what we see happening is everyone grabs little bits of data because governments are being more transparent, or they're grabbing little bits of data and building stories that may be true narrative or false narrative, but they sound true, and it's hard to figure out, which in between. And then you have this sort of misinformation, and that's in part because, there's lots of information available. And so it's really interesting to navigate this, right? You make everything available. I can not that I want to, but like I could just grab a couple of bits of information out of context on Thankyou and write tomorrow's headline and like rip it apart. Like I know like you could too, we all could. And that's the reality once you start putting lots of information out there. And this is where I think there is a line in Regina's point on like brands figuring out what is the line for them. And it is not always going to meet all consumers' expectation. And I think that's okay because, you've got to build a brand to last, not just to meet a sudden new expectation that may actually make your business much harder to run or kind of not exist tomorrow because the market is hard, fast, and at times it feels quite unfair. And as a business, you have to win in that market.
Yeah. It's interesting if there's another audience question in here around that whole point around too much transparency and is that a bad thing? And there are examples of brands that you guys know of that have gone too far and potentially turned the consumers off by revealing too much in terms of the inner workings of how they approach things.
One example that comes to mind is, I might be pronouncing this wrong, is it Decium? The personal care brand. It was like bought out, I think, by L'Oreal. Decium. Anyway, I've probably wrecked the pronunciation of that. But it was
I'm going to have to Google it, Daniel.
It was a high-profile thing, right? It grew really quick and a lot of transparency around ingredients and the way it was built up a huge global following, cult-like following. The founder, he was very transparent. And then there's wild stories all over the internet on this, but he one day took over the Instagram account, changed the password, and there was legal letters and he was getting sued by a shareholder. He made that public on the Instagram. He was getting sued and then he was fighting them and responding to them on the Instagram. And this is an example of like lots of transparency. Founders are all the time fighting different things like that. And he kind of had gone from ingredients to like the daily battles. And I think, some people loved it. He ended up getting removed from the company and it's a pretty sad story. Yeah, it's a sad story, but it's probably an example of like.
But that was a line crossed in terms of the consumers, expectations from that brand. Regina, any thoughts from you?
I can't think of a brand that's gone too far, I guess. But if you're only sharing what's in line with your brand positioning and if it works with what you do, then I think you're probably staying on the right track. But if that's, say if Kmart decided to be all transparent about where they get all their things made and done, I don't think that would encourage people to buy from them. So they don't do that.
You sum that up well. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the big fashion houses and that type of thing they're not very transparent with where they get their stuff made either. So I guess it's brand by brand as to how much they do transparency or not.
Well, look, I think the audience agrees as well. We don't think that brand transparency is just a trend, and it is here to stay. We've got a few more audience questions. I think I have time for a couple more. There's ones in here around as a company grows and evolves, the business strategy grows, evolves, and changes as well. How do we balance that transparency whilst encouraging customers and employees to come along this change journey without alienating them? I think there's an example here around ASOP, expansion, alienating the hipster, early adopter market, etc. So any advice around that? Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes.
Yeah. So as the company grows and evolves, so does business strategy and goals. How do you balance transparency, that is the reason for making particular decisions, whilst encouraging your customers and employees to come along this change journey without alienating them? So I think it might talk to the maturity of the brand as well, and kind of the audiences that we were talking about previously.
Yeah, and I think, oh, sorry, Regina, that kind of be.
Oh no, you can go. I'll go after you.
it's one of the great challenges of leadership. So when you say this is what we're doing and where we're going, people buy into that, or they don't. But if they do, and that changes, that's a shift. And so maybe the ESOP example, and many companies are like this. People buy into this. This is the underdog story. This is like, this is, kind of anti the establishment and the system, and I love it and I'm in. And that may be where it started, but the founders have led it on to major VC investment, huge expansion, possibly always part of the plan. I mean, in kind of startup world, it is often, and some brands navigate that in different ways. But I think the moment you state, hey, this is why we're here, if that changes, that's a really big change journey. And friends love the idea of change, but we hate the process. It is a process. You can't speed it up. And maybe there's a way and to keep people on that journey. I know we're trying it, thank you. But it is not easy, and it starts with the problem of you actually saying and being transparent about your intention, and then at some point in your growth journey changing that.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard when you've bought into something emotionally to then have it sort of changed on you. But if you still, I guess, have that emotional connection to the brand, perhaps you can sort of get there, and if you like the product. So I guess I buy go-to products with Zoe Foster-Blake's skincare, and she recently sold that. And so now I'm like, oh, do I like that she doesn't own it anymore? Because I buy into her as a person and her skincare, not just, I say, the skincare itself. But I probably will still stay with it because I like the products, and I mean, good for her. She's made a multi-million-dollar business. But it is hard. It's hard when you shift the foundations of a business, I guess.
And that go-to moment is such a example, and it's a common example of like all these people, like Regina, you bought it, Justine bought it, like it's great product, and you feel like, oh, we're building this, and then it's like, okay, cool. It's like one person or a group of people have done really well from this thing that we were all doing, but I'm left here. Do I continue with the brand or not? But I think every brand has to jump that at some point if it wants
that hoop.
Get to scale, and hopefully they nail it. And it sounds like I think they will, but it's a real thing, and it happens for many brands.
And as you say, Daniel, there might be some people lost along the way because they are so invested in the founder and in that personality versus the actual brand as well.
Yeah, a lot of little beer brands as well get bought out by bigger companies, and then I think a lot of people sort of drop away. But at the same time, a lot of people would then start drinking it because it gets more budget and more marketing, so more people will know about it. So overall, even though you may have shifted your customer base, you may get more customers in there.
Yeah. Regina, there's one here for you around that Kmart example that you had around, do you expect that organizations like Kmart and other fashion houses will lose market share because of their lack of transparency around that process? And how do they remain current and relevant to this new market expectation? Do they change their business model?
I think it would be really hard to change Kmart's business model and maintain the prices that they currently have. But they could do some things that would make people feel better about buying their $2 kids t-shirts, like having, a fabric recycling center would be good. But then I think in terms of myself, I can still justify buying Kmart because I'm doing better in other areas of my life. So like I could buy really sustainably in one spot, but then I know my kids are going to wear whatever I buy them from, whatever brand I buy them, and they're going to destroy it in about 3 weeks. So I could either spend $40 on a t-shirt that they're going to destroy in 3 weeks, or I could spend $5 on a t-shirt, and you kind of weigh it up. But I think Kmart, they will need to start being better than they currently are to maintain that sort of customer base.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you, Daniel, on that one?
I think there's got to be a wake up at a consumer level that so many of, I'll just say us, have utopian view of like, I can have the trust, transparency, ethics that I want at this price. You cannot. And so and one day in a new world that we're hopefully all working to and get to, you can, right? But like I'm saying, after the 12 years, I'm like, man, this is a minefield. And so there is a gap. And so in all the research and in all the polls, we will all say, oh yeah, I would definitely choose a more sustainable brand. But we get swept up and smashed every day by companies that are not as sustainable, not as thought through, but they're cheaper. So at the end of the day, as a consumer level, it's like, no one's watching, it's cheaper, boom. Like it just, and there's that price element is such a big lever. And that's why, I mean, Kmart works, and then we build how we justify it, and it makes total sense, right? But I think as consumers, I wonder at times we're on this like beautiful high horse around sustainability and ethics and our choices. But then if we all audited our receipt list, it's like, well, yeah, there's a huge disconnect. And how are we going to get there? Well, it's both. We probably as consumers need to expect prices will go up. And we expect brands to become way more, sustainable and ethical. But it's not one. It's not, you can't just, the brands will sort it out. It's a conundrum.
It's a community approach, right? It has to come from both businesses and consumers changing their ways.
It does. And ultimately, because of, I suppose, the way the world and business and capitalism works, someone is often willing to make $1, at all costs, at the most extreme example. And so no matter what the background, if they can get the prices right, they will come in. And if consumers are willing to meet them at that price, that product may go well, and it may knock a whole bunch of other really sustainable, ideas and products out of the water. And it's a huge challenge.
I think we've got 5 minutes left. I'm not sure if we've got time for another question, but I will ask one anyway. For all the business owners in the audience today and all the brand specialists in the audience today, we've talked a lot about transparency and brand trust. What is your advice around helping them kind of build that brand trust for their brands? Regina, might start with you.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I think just to build brand trust, you have to start at the beginning with the clear branding and positioning statement, and know what your brand's about, and then work from there. So, yeah, I guess one of our brands that we worked on that had a very clear brand positioning was Bega's Bee Honey. So they worked and we created the Purple Hive initiative with them, which is a beehive which protects Australia from the varroa mite, which is a mite that's it's killing bee populations. So because they had such a really great sustainability and innovative approach to how they marketed their honey, it meant that they were easily able to get in Coles supermarket because they fit with the value of the Australian way positioning. And then they ended up getting, I think, 12% market share in 18 months, which is really good for a new brand. And I think that was based upon their link that they'd created with Purple Hive initiative.
Yeah. Look, my thoughts on this would be, I think brand authenticity is more important than brand transparency. So brand authenticity could include a sentence like, hey, here's a mistake we made, and here's all the facts around that, and that's an authentic position to hold. But it could also be, we can't answer that question. There is an answer, but just, we're not going to outline all of that. And there are really important reasons why not. And we'll share those reasons. You may not like them, but authentically, this is our position and we have to hold it. And I think that is more sustainable and more important than just a blanket transparency is the answer.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Regina and Daniel, for your time. I can't believe how quickly 45 minutes has flown by. We have recorded this session and we will send it out shortly to all the attendees. So if you'd like to share it with anyone who wasn't able to make it today, please feel free to do so. And please stay in touch with us for any upcoming events, and make sure you follow us on all our socials across Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. We're everywhere. For anyone interested in learning more about branding, please jump onto RMIT Online's website, online.rmit.edu.au. We have an amazing course around brand experience and other marketing related courses as well. And finally, as a thank you to my lovely team who's put that pun in there, to everyone who's attended today's webinar. The team at Thankyou are offering a free copy of My Next Chapter, which is a business starter kit with every purchase of Chapter 1, Daniel's best-selling book there. And that takes you behind the scenes of the Thankyou startup journey. So link will be available in the chat. I think Sunita's already put that there, and also in the email that we send out post the webinar. So look forward to hopefully seeing you guys next time. And thank you again, Regina and Daniel.